Welcome to Highline Excel 2016 class video number 20. Hey, if you want to download this Excel file, Business 218 Video 20 Start, or the finished file, or the PDF file, click on the link below the video. Wow, we have an amazing video here. We've been talking about cleaning and transforming data. And of course, now we're going to talk about Power Query, known as Get and Transform in Excel 2016. And in this video, we're going to see how to clean and transform and import data from multiple Excel files, where each Excel file has one sheet each. And then we're going to create a dashboard with a pivot table and see the Show Values As feature for creating calculations in a pivot table. Now we want to start off by going and looking at the actual Excel files that we're going to import. We're going to start with 3 cities, and if we open one of these, it's an Excel file, of course. And notice there's a sheet. It says Seattle, and here's our data: date, sales rep, store ID. If I control down arrow, it looks like there's 200,000 rows of data here for the Seattle store. Not only that, but because we're going to be importing data from Excel, and we have many files, we're going to use the From File, From Folder feature. Now, earlier in the class, we used text files, and this feature works almost seamlessly with a couple clicks if you have text files. But the difference here is these are Excel files. Excel files do not hold just text. They hold lots of different objects, like a sheet. Like over here, there's a second sheet. Right here, if I highlight this range, you can see there's a defined name. If I go over and open up one of these other Excel files, Tacoma. Yes, it only looks like there's a single sheet here, but if I right-click, notice I can point to unhide, which means there's some hidden sheets. Over in the Portland file, we not only have our Portland sheet with our data that we want, but we have another sheet, and there's an Excel table. So the point is, there's lots of objects in an Excel file. So when we tell Power Query to import all the different Excel files, it's going to take a bunch of extra steps. And actually, we're going to get to see a brand new function called Excel.Workbook in Power Query. And finally, we want to look at our end result. We're going to go over here. Here's the dashboard we want to create. We need to group by month. Then we need total sales, percent of total, the amount of change from each period, percentage change, a running total by month, and the percentage running total. And of course, our slicers, so we can click and slice to show any particular city or year. All right, now we're in our start file here, and we notice we only have one sheet, but guess what? We're going to import a lot of data into the data model. So we want to go to Data, Get and Transform, which is actually Power Query. New query, From File, From Folder. And just as we did earlier in the class, we click the Browse button, and we need to navigate. Now, when you download this file here, you'll have to unzip it. And there are a bunch of extra files directly in the Video 23 Excel files to import. But we want to click on the Start. But that Start file right there has those 3 files we're going to clean, transform, import, and then build our dashboard. All right, I'm going to click OK. And when I click OK, I'm telling Power Query to import anything in that Start folder. Click OK. Click OK. If you see this intermediate step, click Edit. Now, in the Power Query editor, we have a bunch of information about those 3 files. But we want to start off by giving it a good name. And remember, this name will be the query name. So when we have to edit it later, we can come back. It will also be the table name in Power Pivot Data Model. And we want to give it a good name, something like City Excel Data, and Enter. Now, here's our 3 files. And there's some columns with information about those files in the folder. The first thing is that our city name is going to come from the file name. So I need to extract city name. And secondly, from the extension column here, we notice it's .xlsx. But I actually want to protect with the filter feature against any other types of files. Like if there's a Word document or a text file or something, I only want to import .xlsx. Now, earlier in the class, we assumed that our folder would only have a certain file type. which is usually a safe assumption. But here, let's see how to do this. I want to make sure that I only get .xlsx. I'm going to click the drop down, text filters, and I want to say the file extension contains .xlsx. That way, it will only import if it sees .xlsx. Click OK. Now, we need to extract city name. I'm going to notice the pattern. It's always 2 characters I want to get rid of, and I always want to get rid of the .xlsx. I'm going to click on the name column. And first, I'm actually going to split it based on a fixed width of 2 characters. So I come up to split by number of characters. I'm going to say 2 once as far left as possible. When I click OK, it splits the column. Now I need to clean up this name to column. I'm going to choose to replace .xlsx with nothing. So I click replace values, type .xlsx, and I'm going to replace it with nothing. Click OK. Now I have 2 columns, the content and the name. None of the other columns I need. So with name to selected, I'm going to hold Control and click on content. Right click, remove other columns. Now we mentioned that the Excel file with lots of objects is much different than a text file. So that means we cannot use that double downward pointing arrow. That's if we have text files. We're actually going to have to add a new column and use the Excel.workbook function to get the right objects from this content column. So we come up to Add Columns, Add Custom Column. We're going to name this column something smart like Get Excel Data. Now I can create a custom column formula using Excel.workbook. Now this is the first time we've seen a function in Power Query, also called the M language. This is a special function that's going to work inside of Power Query. It is case sensitive, and you need that dot. But there it is, Excel.workbook, and I'm going to double click on the content over here. Notice there's our square brackets to indicate that that's a column or a field. Close parentheses, and that's all we need. This will actually create a new column with all the different objects that we can select from. I'm going to click OK. And there it is. It says table. We'll actually expand it in a second to get to the different objects. We no longer need content. Right click, remove. Now I have a double sideways pointing arrow. I'm going to click this to expand. It will open up a drop down. Different objects, name, data, item, kind, hidden. We do not want to have use original column as prefix checked. That just means it would use this name as column header names, and I want all of these. So now I click OK, which will add a bunch of extra columns. Now hidden, it just says true or false. We saw that there was one hidden sheet over there. We don't need to worry about this column. Kind, we do need to worry about. We need to filter this because I do not want defined names and I do not want tables. So I want to filter to only give me a sheet. So when I click the drop down, I can come unselect all and select sheet. Now, you remember that some of the sheets had names and some didn't. This just gives me all the sheets. When I click OK, that column is filtered. And you could see all of our steps over here. Now, I'm going to come to the item column, and these are our different sheet names. Now, I would like Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland. And later, if I have sheets called SF for San Francisco or OAK for Oakland, I want those sheets. So I actually want to tell this column to do a text filter. And I want to say I only want files that do not contain the word sheet. That means if it has the default sheet name sheet, it will not be imported. If it has a proper city name, then of course it will be imported. I'm going to click OK. And there we have just our sheets for Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland. Now, if we always had the actual city name in proper form for a sheet name, then we could use this column. Remember, we had to work hard over here in the name to column. This was the original column that had the file name. But because some of our sheets later we'll see don't have a proper name, we're not going to use this column. Now, all we need is name to and data. So I'm going to click on name to, hold Control, click on data, right click, remove other columns. Now we have city and our data, and now we can use our double sideways pointing arrows to expand. Remember, we had 3 columns. Column 1, 2, 3 will be date, sales, and store ID. I don't want this checked. I click OK. And now we finally are getting down to the data. Now, just like in our earlier example with text files, there are field names here in the first Excel sheet, but there's also field names down below. Well, we're going to promote the first row by coming to the upper left-hand corner, clicking the drop-down, and say First Row as Headers. That still means we have trouble down below and in future files. So I want to actually pick whichever column has the fewest unique records, not including this one, because this one will have actual city names down there in the record that contains the field name. So I'm not using this column. Store ID has the fewest unique records, so I'm going to click the filter. It's a big data set, so I'm definitely going to read the message. List may be incomplete. Load more. And now when I scroll down, there it is. Down below is a rogue field name. When I filter out the field name store ID, the whole record is removed. That means in any data sets we have now or future data sets, it will remove store ID and the field names. Click OK. Now I'm going to come up here and double click and call this city. Enter. Now there's one step that we are going to forget to do right here, and it will cause trouble later, but that will be our prompt to come back and edit this and see that everything updates beautifully when we use Power Query. All right, so we're thinking we're done. We have our name. We have all of our steps. I'm going to come up to Home. We're definitely going to click Close and Load To because we don't want to load this into an Excel table or onto a sheet. I say Only Create Connection. Add this to the data model. And now when I click Load, there it is, 500,000 rows of data. Now that could have fit into Excel, but we're going to get future data updates. And certainly, if we store it in the data model, it is a much smaller file size. All right, I want to go look. I'm going to go to Power Pivot. Over to Manage button in Data Model, I want to go look at our data set. And there we have 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. There's the table name, which is also Power Query name. There's how many records we have. Now I want to go back over to Excel, Power Pivot. We are going to create a measure to add. So I'm going to say Measures, New Measure. This is the DAX formula language. Of course, as we've seen a couple times in the class, the advantage is we build the formula here, add our number formatting, and it will appear in the field list, and we can drag and drop. Now, the table name up here is the table that the DAX measure will appear in. The name of the new DAX measure is going to be Total Sales. Tab. I'm going to give it a description. DAX sum function to add total sales from sales code and add number formatting. Now I can click after the equal sign SUM tab, down arrow, and check that out. There's the table name, and in square bracket, our sales column. Be sure to put a close parentheses. Now we come down here, and you can pick which number formatting you want. I want currency, 0 decimal places. And now when I click OK, this measure will be created. Now I want to go over to our data model window, Alt-Tab, and there is a problem. So this is something that happens. We're in a hurry. We've done our Power Query to import it. We create our DAX measure, and there's an error. Well, we can read. If we click right here, it says semantic error. The function sum takes an argument that evaluates to numbers or dates and cannot work with values of type string. Now, a text string means that there are text values. We can even look up in our data model table. There's our visual cue. All the way back to the very first video, number 1 in this series, we talked about how important that visual cue is. So there it is. We have to go back to Power Query and change the data type to some sort of number. Now, we could fix it over here, but I want to fix it over in Power Query. So anytime we import it, it's all working fine. Now we go over to Excel. If you don't have your workbook query window open, you go to Data, Get and Transform, Show Queries. I'm going to come over to City Excel Data, right-click, Edit. And sure enough, we need to click on each one of the columns, go up to data type, text is fine. I'm clicking on date. Any is not OK. If we tried to group that, it would not work. I'm going to say date. Sales, how about instead of any, let's do decimal. Store ID, I'm going to say text. And now when I click close and load, because we've already loaded it, it will load right back into the data model. And now when we come back to our data model, there it is. It's working fine. Now let's create a pivot table on a new sheet. I'm going to click Pivot Table, New Sheet, click OK. I'm immediately going to come down and call this something like Report and Enter. Now let's drag this over here. We can always tell that the table is from the data model. It's got that dark line at the top. Expand. There is our DAX measure for adding. Now the first thing I want to do is group by month. This is a new feature for 2016 Excel in the data model. When I drag the date field, which are serial number dates, down to the row area, it takes a while, but there it is. It added a bunch of new fields here. We could see over in our pivot table, when we go over to our data model, we could see it's added a bunch of extra columns. Now, of course, if you had a big data set, you'd want to build a calendar table and use relationships. But for our data set, that is pretty convenient, and it is an amazing new feature in Excel 2016. Now I want to remove date. I'm going to click and drag. I want to remove quarter, click and drag. I don't even want year right now. Just like that, I have my months. I'm immediately going to fix row labels, design, report layout, show in tabular, or outline. I'm going to say outline because I don't want any gray lines. Go to our table, drag total sales, 1. And get this, I'm going to drag it down a second time. Now, this will be the first time that we've seen show values as in this class. We want to add those extra calculations we saw at the beginning of the video. I want each one of these amounts as a percentage of the overall total. Right-click and it's Value Field Settings. You can change everything here, the name, the number formatting, the function, or show values as. Now I'm going to say percent of grand total. I also want to make sure and give it a good name, percent of total. Now, because we're doing a percentage, the show values as will automatically add percentage number formatting, so we don't need to worry about number formatting. When I click OK, that is pretty amazing. Now I'm going to drag total sales down 1 and 2 more times. So now we have 4 columns. And I want the actual amount of the change. That means from each month, January to February to March. I want to say the amount of change from the previous month. Then I want to see percent of change. Right-click, Value Field Settings. Here's Show Values As, and I want to say scroll down. Difference from will show us the change. Now, it needs to know the base field. We only have 1 in the row area. And it needs to know, do we want it from the previous, the next, or sometimes you want to see the amount of the change off of a certain base, for example, January. But we want previous. We want to make sure and give this a good name. I'm going to call it change and click OK. Check that out. That is amazing. Totally different calculations than we've done so far in this class in a pivot table. Right-click, Value Field Settings. I'm going to scroll all the way down to percent difference from. Base field, of course, is fine. We want from previous, and we want to give this a good name like percent change and enter. Absolutely amazing. Now let's drag it 2 more times. 1, 2. We can drag down the pivot table field list if we want to see them all. And now we want to do a running total. So it's a cumulative total moving forward. So that means when we get all the way to December, it will be the grand overall total. Right-click, Value Field Settings. Drop down. Let's see, running total in. Base field is fine, and we're going to call this running total. Now, we don't need to worry about $ currency type number formatting because it's acting on that DAX measure. Click OK. And finally, we want to come to the last column. Right-click, Value Field Settings, all the way down to percent running total. And we're going to give it a good name, something like percent running total, and enter. Now, I want to add some slicers up above. I'm actually going to select the row header 3, maybe all the way down to 7. Right-click Insert. Click somewhere in the pivot table. Pivot table tools, Analyze, Insert Slicer. Let's say year and city. Click OK. As we saw in our dashboard video, we can format these however we want. Here's our slicer tool options. I'm going to say, please give me 3 columns. Now I'm going to set the height to 2 inches and enter. Not 2 inches. I'm going to set it to 1 inch and enter. And expand. I'm anticipating that we'll have more cities later. And how about this one too? I'm going to add it on 2 rows, so I'm going to say leave it like that. Now let's add a little bit of formatting here. I'm going to click inside the pivot table, Design, drop down. And we talked about a custom pivot table style in back in video number 3. But I'm just going to pick, let's say, pick this one right here, medium 13. Click on the slicer. I'm going to add similar color. Click in the slicer, similar color. Let's format this. I'm going to say 1 inch. Enter. Click on both of them holding Control. Align. Top. And now I'm going to go to View. Grid lines. Turn them off. OK, so there we have our sliceable pivot table report. I'm going to right-click. I don't like the way the columns are changing, so right-click Pivot Table Options. And down here, Auto Fit Column Widths on Update. We'll uncheck that. Click OK. 2015 Tacoma, Seattle, Portland. Now, let's go back, and I want to look in Windows Explorer. I'm going to go back over to Windows Explorer, and I'm looking just inside of Video 23 Excel Files Import. There's a bunch of extra files, and I want to test our theory to see if our filter to include only .xlsx will work. If I double-click the Oakland file to open, if I look down here, notice there's Oak, and that's not the actual word we wanted in our column for city name. Also in our San Francisco one, I think it comes in as SF. So that is the reason that from our original 3 files, we chose to get the city name from here, because that is the consistent source for our city name. All right, I'm going to highlight all of these. Control-C, double-click, Control-V to paste them here. Now, remember, we originally pointed Power Query to that start folder. So now it'll try to import all of these. Let's go back over to Excel. Now I'm going to use the keyboard, which is the data. Refresh all. I only have this data model and these pivot tables, so that's why I'm going to use that. Sometimes if you have lots of things to refresh, you don't want to do that. I'm going to use the keyboard Control-Alt-F5. And now it is working. And just like that, it has refreshed. You can see over here in our workbook queries, it looks like 810,000 rows of data. Now I can slice on San Francisco, on Oakland. It looks like I need to fix my final report a little bit here. But now I can slice and dice however I want. And it is certainly amazing. When we clicked refresh, it went back to that folder and got all of the latest data. All right, so in this video, we saw for the first time Show Values As, a powerful calculating feature inside of a pivot table. We made our slicers and our little dashboard. And of course, we saw data from file, from folder to import multiple Excel files. All right, next video, we'll have a little bit more fun importing data from different Excel sheets with Power Query and building reports. All right, we'll see you next video.